All right, we've already talked a little bit about how England moved towards liberalism with some of the reforms and some of the different laws they passed. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about France, and France is definitely a little bit different. France doesn't move um, to liberalism in a gradual way. Rather, it swings violently back and forth with various different revolutions beyond just the French Revolution of 1789. Following the Congress of Vienna, there's an effort made to go ahead and put the ruling families back on the throne. In this case of France, the Bourbons. And the first attempt at that is a guy by the name of Louis XVIII. And Louis XVIII goes ahead and he tries to reestablish the monarchy. He's a moderate. He understands the limitations, that they're not going to go back to an absolute monarchy. He knows that if there's any chance to survive, that he's got to go ahead and make some concessions. He can't be the same type of king that Louis XVI, his brother, was. And so one of the things he does is he does go ahead and he keeps the rights of man. And that's definitely very much a concession to the liberals. And he makes himself a constitutional monarchy. He does go ahead and allow people the right to vote. Granted, it's limited. Again, so here we see a gradual step that Louis is in favor of making. He's willing to concede a little bit. But still, under his rule, only about 100,000 out of 30 million people are allowed to vote. So there are significant restrictions on the right to vote. By all accounts, Louis does a pretty good job as king. He's making concessions. He's moving in the direction that the French are willing to accept, and he goes ahead and by all accounts has a fairly successful rule. However, he passes away, and in steps his brother, Charles X, in 1824. He is hardcore, old line, reactionary. He wants the old regime. He wants the way it used to be before the revolution. He is going to get rid of all this stuff where there's all these liberal reforms and voting and everything's like that. So he goes ahead and basically tosses it all out. He establishes, hey, I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to do what I want to do. And I'm going to go ahead and make things the way I need to. And so he he disbands the assembly and basically establishes himself, or tries to establish himself, as the absolute monarch again. By this point, the people of France will have none of it. There's riots in the street to the point where it's a threat to his family and himself, and so he has to abdicate or step down from the throne, and he flees and lives out the rest of his life in England. So his regime very short-lived. So again, here you have Louis moving a little bit moderate, and then you have Charles X coming all the way back and becoming an absolute monarch again. So back and forth. And then to take his place, when Charles abdicates, he sets up his grandson. He says, well, okay, my grandson's going to take over. In steps this guy, Louis Philippe. Louis Philippe was a royal. He was, again, somebody who was in the royal line, but he was a little different. His father had actually supported the French Revolution. He himself had grown up learning about the French Revolution, and so he definitely favors revolutionary ideas. And he just knows that, hey, the liberals want reform, the city workers want to work. He's got to do some things to go ahead and make that happen. He's at first known as the Citizen King. Everybody really likes him. They think there's a lot of great hope for him. Unfortunately, the results of his reign are less than favorable. By the end of his reign, conditions in the cities, there's more and more unemployment. Workers are having trouble keeping jobs, feeding themselves. And in step guys like Louis Blanc, who was a socialist, who said, hey, the government should step in and should set up situations where the workers can control the work, where the workers are in charge. This is really the early stages of what would eventually become known as communism and socialism, is what you see forming here. And that leads to the revolution of 1848, where Louis Philippe himself, again, he tries to move a little bit more towards the liberal side, but he himself abdicates. It's not going fast enough for the French population. So they kick him out. They're going to go ahead and move it even further. So he steps down. Enter Napoleon III. He steps in and he says, okay, we're going to have a government. We're going to have a government that's legitimate, that's elected by the people. We're going to allow men to vote. We're going to make this democratic. And that's the way it looks when he first starts off, when he comes in 1848. But in reality, the reality of the situation is by 1851, he declares himself to be the emperor of France, and he basically makes himself the dictator. He goes ahead and gets rid of these liberal policies. He goes ahead and has these huge work programs where he's trying to put people back to work. And so early on in his reign, he's actually pretty popular. The city workers are like, okay, he's going ahead and he's giving us jobs. The middle class is excited because he at least talks the big game of the Constitution and legitimacy, and he extends the right to vote to them. The nationalists, because He's restoring pride in France. He's beautifying Paris, widening the streets. In reality, he does that so that it was harder to go ahead and revolt against him, and easier to move the army in and out. But so the nationalists, hey, he's restoring pride. The farmers are like him because, again, he's kind of a guy of the people. But that early popularity fades as liberals start to realize, hey, this guy's not really a liberal. This guy's not going ahead and allowing us to govern ourselves. Rather, he's not a king, but he's almost just as bad. He's the guy who goes ahead and does what he wants to do anyway. That's basically the same problem we had with the king. The Catholics don't like him because he's taking away power from the church. The nationalists turn on him because, again, he's going ahead and setting himself up almost as an emperor. He's also unpopular because he starts sending people to a place called Devil's Island, which is a prison camp, and he sends more and more people over there, and that diminishes his popularity. On top of that, there's a series of wars that he engages in: the Crimean War, and then the Franco-Prussian War. The Franco-Prussian War is really what leads to his downfall, 1870-71. Napoleon III opposes German unification. Bismarck, who was the leader of the Germans, goes ahead and rallies the German people to go ahead and oppose France, and France is easily defeated. They lose Alsace, they lose Lorraine, and they have to pay a lot of money. This really leads to the end of Napoleon III. The nationalists then, they look at this and they look at what had gone in Mexico, where, again, Napoleon III tries to set up an emperor in Mexico, Maximilian, and that is a disaster. Although he succeeds a little bit in Asia, he succeeds a little bit in Africa, he's really, these disasters with the Franco-Prussian War in Mexico really lead to his undoing, and it leads to a revolution in 1870. So again, he kind of takes things and in some ways moves them forward, but in a lot of ways moves them backwards. This revolution of 1870 then finally sets up the Third Republic of France. And so this is for the first time you start to put an end to these swings between dictators and monarchs, and the few extensions to liberal ideas, and then the steps backwards. And it's finally the Third Republic that goes ahead and starts to really push a lot of your liberal reforms ahead. Third Republic from 1871 to 1940, after really almost 100 years of revolution after revolution of instability, you finally have a period of stability in France with the Third Republic. Again, for approximately 70 years. It's not without some problems. Certainly, the election of 1875, you have a Republican majority, and the Republic actually doesn't get off the ground until 1879. So there's this huge time span where they're trying to figure out how to put this whole thing together. That's certainly one of the big problems they have. So again, 1871 to 1879, the Republic actually starts. So it took them a little while. The results, they do end up with a prime minister, they end up with a president. They have a multi-party system, which France still has today. They have to develop coalitions, and this encourages compromise. They establish things like free public education, which it was really intended to push the Republican ideas. So it's almost the public education is a way to go ahead and support the government and create citizens that are loyal to the government. If you want to call it indoctrination, you could certainly probably make the case for that. They go ahead and they push that. Not only do they make education free, they also make it compulsory, saying you had to do it. So, hey, you had to go to these schools that plugged the Republic and pushed the Republic ideal. Threats to the Republic. There's a couple different scandals. The Boulanger affair in 1889, probably more significantly the Dreyfus affair, where an artillery officer is accused of spying and is put on trial, and then all of a sudden turns out that the trial wasn't really all it was said to be, and it kind of discredits the government. And so you have liberal tension and conservatives, and this threatens to rip the Republic apart, but the Republic hangs in there together, and really accomplishes quite a bit. It establishes, like I said, a coalition government. One of the biggest accomplishments, it survives. It survives these different crises, these different scandals. It establishes separation of church and state. As I've already mentioned, it develops free and also compulsory education. It also establishes Social Security, a social safety net, and France being one of the first countries to do that. And then also, with the stability that comes from that 70-year period without revolution, you see the growth of business. And again, that's to be expected after the violent revolutions back and forth. Those types of changes aren't conducive to business. Stability is conducive to the growth of business, and the French Republic goes ahead and establishes that. Also then, these things aren't limited to just France. You also get revolts that spread from France in 1830 and 1848 1830 also a series of revolts. In 1830, there's revolts in France. There's revolts in Belgium. These are successful in moving liberal agendas forward. But there's also examples where the liberal agenda is squashed, like in Italy and Poland. And then this happens again in 1848. 1848 revolts in France. That's actually where Les Miserables is actually set in those 1848 revolts prior to the arrival of Napoleon III. And so again, you have these series of revolts that start in France and then spread elsewhere. Again, coming back to, hey, if France sneezes, Europe catches a cold. Hey, these things start in France, they spread to the rest of Europe.